All right, I want to give you a quick introduction to Jupyter Lab. It's a completely new interface that is designed to replace the old Jupyter Notebook interface. So I think it's worth getting sort of the hang of what that interface looks like. So I'm going to launch Jupyter Lab, and it runs inside a browser just like a notebook does. And so you'll see that this interface should be the same whether you're on a Mac or a PC. So let me quickly give you sort of an overview of what's going on here. The top menu bar here, it's a little disorienting to some people because the menu bar runs inside your browser. You should really think of this as your entire interface, and therefore this menu bar is within the browser. And you've got the usual stuff. You can open, create new files, etc., etc., and we'll do all of that in a second. The second thing that I want you to look at is this area on the left that we call the left sidebar. And the left sidebar allows you to look at things like what are the different things going on in your workspace. And that's your third major piece here. The third major piece of the interface is right here that occupies most of the screen space. And that is the workspace. When I switch over to this little tabs button here, it'll tell you what open tabs you have in your workspace. And right now, you only have one tab open, and that is the launcher. The launcher is where everything starts. And so you go from there and you open new tabs and files and all these wonderful things. Before I go into the launcher, I just want to point out that this is actually a regular file browser here. I can create a new folder here within this hierarchy. So for example, I've got a new folder here. I can right click that and I can say rename that, and I'm going to call that data because I'm going to download my data there. And now I'm going to actually start doing some Python work in here. So let me start by creating a notebook. So the way I do this is I just click on that. And you can see that it's created a file called untitled.ipynb. That's the extension that they've chosen. It stands for IPython Notebook. Let me rename that right away because I actually don't like calling it untitled. So I'm going to call it orientation.ipynb. And if you see this right here, that title has changed. Okay, so this is a regular notebook. It's actually a much fancier version of the old notebook, and I'll show you a few things that you can do here that you couldn't do in the old notebooks. But let's try something really simple. By the way, I'm going to just type in all kinds of Python code here. Don't worry about the Python code itself. We'll have plenty of time to talk about Python itself. So if you see any of this code and you say, what is going on? Don't worry about it. I'm not going to do anything super fancy anyway. So let's do something really simple, 2 plus 3. Now, if I hit enter, nothing happens. Why is that? Because I've entered the data into this cell, and the cell is waiting for me to enter everything, all the code that I want evaluated, all the Python code that I want evaluated. So for example, I can say A is assigned 10, B is assigned 15, and I can say something like C is assigned A plus B, and then I can say C. I'm just executing a piece of code, and the last thing I execute is just an expression which has the value C, and I hit Shift Enter, and when I hit Shift Enter, what it's doing is it's evaluating all that code in that cell, and it's printing out a value of whatever the last line of code was that was executed. So for example, I can now say C is assigned 20, so I've overwritten the value of C, and I see C again, and you'll get 20. Okay, so nothing special going on here. It's just your standard notebook so far. But now I can do a few interesting things that you might not have expected. So for example, I can take that and I can drag and drop cells. So for example, I can take that, you see that that cursor there is changed. So I'm going to move that cursor. I'm going to take that and I'm going to drag that cell down here and drop it. And you can see that I've reordered the cell. So that's an example of the sort of cool thing that you can do that you couldn't do before. All right. As you can see, when I'm entering this information in this cell, it tells me that my cell here is a cell of code. What I can do is I can switch that to say Markdown. For example, I can say this is a heading, and then I can say I can do some nice formatting, such as emphasis. And you see what happened there is I just put underscores or bold. Okay. I can also do, this is a subheading. I can make lists. And so, for example, let me say item 1, item 2, and final item. Okay, now I'm going to hit Shift Return. And of course, this is not Python. It's not a code cell. It's a markdown cell. And you will see that it produces some very nice formatted output. What's really nice about this is now I can type in code right after that. So I can say 3 plus 3, and it gives you 6. So I'm able to sort of add nice text and documentation. That's why they call this a notebook. You can sort of make notes as you go and intersperse it with your text. This has turned out to be the definitive way to make Python code examples and other information available on the net. There are probably millions of notebooks around, and these notebooks are very, very powerful, very flexible. They're entire textbooks written in as a set of notebooks. I'll have some examples that I've added in the resources section of notebooks that I particularly like. So there's code cells, there's markdown cells. So let's look at other interesting things we can do inside these cells. Let's try this. Again, don't worry if what I'm saying doesn't make any sense, or what I'm typing in doesn't make any sense to you. But let's import matplotlib.pyplot as plt, and let's say plt.plot range 10 as the x-axis and range 10 as the y-axis. And again, I'm hitting Shift Return, and boom, what you do is you see that you have a nice little plot, which is a straight line, which is exactly what we plotted. But again, like I said, don't worry about that if that doesn't make any sense to you. We'll have plenty of opportunities to play with that. So that's an example of something that you can do right here in the notebook interface. It's a very convenient way for you to play around and draw plots and charts and things like that. Let's look at some of the other things you can do with this interface. I'm going to go back to the launcher for that. So you can, again, just go back here right there, and you'll go right back to the launcher. And I'm going to just open a text file. So you might think, okay, well, no big deal. Why are we opening a text file? Well, here's an interesting thing that you can do. I'm going to rename that file, and I'm going to say, rename that to example.md, which is a markdown file. And I already showed some markdown, but this is an example of a markdown file, which it's a really nice, simple way of creating a text file that actually looks nice when it gets rendered. And so I can say, for example, introduction. Of course, much better if you spell it right. Okay, and I'll just do the same example, same sort of stuff we did before. So for example, item 1, item 2, and item 3. All right, now there's a lot more we can do. We can embed images, we can do all kinds of beautiful things, but let me show you something kind of cool here. So I'm just going to go back here to this file. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say, open that same file with Markdown Preview. So what's going to happen now is now I've got 2 views into this file. You've got one tab, for example, .md, which is of course what we were editing, but you see now I've got another tab. And so I can switch to that one, and you can see it's actually rendering this tab exactly as I go. And in fact, if I say, for example, this is section 2, whoops, you can see if when I switch here, it actually is rendering it right there. Now you might think, wow, this is really painful, but to go back and forth. So what I can do now is I can take this and drag it, and you'll see that it forms this sort of overlay that tells you where you want me to drag it, and it will automatically split the screen. So I'm going to drag and drop, and now you see I have two views into the exact same file, one of which is being rendered in this very pretty way, and the other is what is just being rendered like a regular text file. But the beautiful thing is that they're both exactly the same file, and these are two views into the same file. So I can do very interesting things like saying, this is an example of a cool thing I can do in Jupyter Lab, right? You can see there, right there, that thing is getting updated as I go. I can do bold. Well, of course, I should do bold. And you see right there, as it's going, it's rendering that. It's got fencing, if you're familiar with that. So I can add code here. So I put 3 little backticks, and I can tell it that I'm going to be writing some Python code. And again, please don't worry about what this is, but I can actually type in Python code, and it will format it neatly as Python. So for example, I can say A is assigned 10, B is assigned 20, print the sum is a of A and B is something like that, and I can say is A plus B, right? You see that. And if you scroll down here, you can see that it's doing syntax coloring for you. If you want to see it here, you can move these things around in a different way. So for example, I can put it on my right, and it'll render this on the right. And section 3. All right, so this is an example of what you can do with Jupyter Labs. It's really not just for notebooks. You can do all kinds of other things with it as well. In particular, we can start looking at things like CSV files. So let me go copy the CSV files into that data folder, and let me get right back. All right, so I have downloaded and transferred the data right into that data folder right there that we had created a little while ago. So let's go in there and take a look at it. Let's take this file called in30mvwrets.csv. Double click on that. And you see that what you've got here is a really nice CSV viewer. What this is, and we'll work with this data in the very next lab, monthly returns of various sectors. So the food sector returned that much in that month. This is data going back, monthly data going back to 1926. And you can see it's really very fast. It's really nice. And again, just like any of these other tabs, you can lay them out however you want. You can lay them on the right. You can lay them out below. It's really incredibly flexible. Okay, now one thing I do want to point out to you is that just because you've got this one file here doesn't mean that you can only have one view of that file. For example, I can go to this file and I can right click here and I can say new view for notebooks. So what that does is it basically creates another view of this exact same notebook. So you've got two views and they're perfectly synced. So for example, if I change this and I say, if I can go in and edit this and say, this is a new heading, you see this view changed as well. In fact, you can do really cool things like copy. So let's say you're working with a very large file. You can take this cell. Remember I told you you can do drag and drop? Well, you can drag and drop within the same notebook if you want to, from one area to another. And it's really nice because you can sort of just drag and drop from this view of the notebook in here, and poof, it's gone. And these two are now perfectly synced. And you see this is a new heading, this is a new heading. Essentially what this does, in this case, it just made a copy. Okay, before I wrap up here, I want to show you a couple other things that you have in the launcher. So I'm going to hit plus here to go back to the launcher. For people who like just using the old style console, that's still there. So now you can access that through Jupyter Lab as well. So I'm going to hit this. If you've never seen this interface before, then don't worry about it, but you now can get a console interface. So if you just want to do old style console stuff, you can do that. You can also just scroll down here, and you can also just fire up a terminal. And if, again, you're not interested or you don't know what a terminal prompt is, don't worry about it. I would say it probably is a good thing for you to know what the terminal prompt is. There's lots of good tutorials out there on YouTube and elsewhere, and I'd encourage you to use that. But there you go. So if you say pwd, you know, echo hello, so you just get basically a bash prompt on your machine. Now that's because I'm on my Mac. If you were on a PC, you would get a command prompt. Now, there's one actually very interesting thing that you actually do need to drop into the command line, and that is to install extensions. And there are a whole bunch of extensions that you can install, but the one I'm going to install, because I'm actually going to use this, is something called Draw.io. Now, if you're not familiar with Draw.io, you should go to draw.io. And it's actually this very cool interface by which you can draw some very nice flowcharts and stuff like that. I'm not going to sort of give you a whole demo of that, but it's a very easy way for you to sort of draw diagrams on the web. All right, very cool stuff. The nice thing is you can do all of this right within Jupyter Lab. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to say Jupyter Lab Draw.io. Now this is going to take a little while, and you may get an error because the Draw.io code is written in JavaScript, and so you need Node installed. If you don't have Node installed, you can install it yourself by just going to the Node.js website, but you can actually just do it from within this interface by using conda. Conda is the installation command that comes with Anaconda. So I can say conda install Node.js, and that might take, again, a little while to run, but it will complete. And once that's done, you can go ahead and install that. And now you should be able to go ahead and install the Draw.io extension for Jupyter. Again, this might take a little while. Okay, so that probably took you a little while. And again, I'm doing this on a Mac. You will see a slightly different process on Windows. And restart Jupyter Lab. So I'm going to now close this out and let's say launch again. And this time when we launch it, we should see the ability to create diagrams. So now when I click on diagram, there you go. I've got draw.io right there in Jupyter Lab. So again, I'm not going to do a demo, but my point is that you can very easily create new diagrams here and go in and say things like stage 1, etc. You get the idea. There's enormous power here. I'm going to suggest that you go to the Draw.io website and find information on this. The one thing I will tell you is these menus within this don't work as well. Half of them don't work. I would suggest when you want to, let's say, write this out, save as. So for example, I can take this and I can say File, Export Diagram as an SVG, and that works. So if you just want to put this out as an SVG, you just go export diagram as SVG, give it the name of file, and you're sort of done. All right. Okay, good. So I think hopefully I've persuaded you that Jupyter Lab is worth checking out. And let's go straight into Lab 1 because we're ready.